Hello and welcome back to another video. Today we're going to do Like a Dragon, Pirate, Yakuza in Hawaii for the proposed minimum requirement, which are as follow: Intel i5 3470, AMD Ryzen 3 1200, 8GB of RAM, GTX 1650 or AMD RX 560 or the Intel Arc A380. And for once, we have a dev that put the target, mean 1080p, low settings to get 30 FPS with Balance FSR 1.0. Welcome to Response PC, I'm Dunk, let's game on. So let's start with the Intel side, the i5 4460, because I don't have the i5 3470 and the closest one I have is the 4460. Both 4-core 4-thread running at 3.2 GHz, but the 3470 will boost at 3.6 and the 4460 will boost at 3.4. For the GPU, I start with the GTX 1650 and my 8 gig kit was on another system doing other tests, so I put a 16 gig in that system, but we're never going to pass the 8 gig anyway. Obviously, since it was exactly noted by the dev, we're going to play at a 1080p to reach 30 FPS at the lowest settings and FSR 1 balance, but for some reason in the settings there's FSR 1 and FSR 2, so I don't know why someone will choose FSR 1. Anyway, I choose FSR 2 balance, and with those settings we get an average of 84 FPS, so quite far from the 30 FPS. Probably that was with the FSR 1, I don't know, doesn't make any sense, but it's highly playable and it's way over the 30 FPS. The GPU is pegged at its maximum at 99% utilization and using 2.9 GB of VRAM. CPU, we are in the mid 60, so for sure the 3470 will run the game, since my 4460 is a little bit less boosting. And for the RAM, we're using 6.2 to 6.3 GB of RAM. Even though I put my 16 gig kit in it, we don't even using 8. So we can at least say that the dev had the memory right, even though the GPU is a bit overkill because we're far from 30 FPS and the CPU still has some space for utilization. Jumping to AMD side, the Ryzen 3 1200 and the RX 560 4GB variant, which doesn't make any sense if you compare to the GTX 1650 4GB, because the GTX 1650 is 100% more performance than the RX 560. Should be maybe the GTX 1050, because as you just saw, the GTX 1650 was crushing the FPS at low settings, because as you can see the RX 560 is about 40 FPS average at 1080p, low settings, FSR 2.0 balance. That's a kind of FPS that seems to have been targeted by the dev. The GPU is pegged at 100% using 2.6 GB of VRAM, similar to the GTX 1650. The CPU is in the mid 30s and we're using 6.9 GB of RAM. So at least on the AMD side they didn't mess up the hardware, because I'm pretty sure when you reach a bit more intensive area or bigger city, it will be a bit harder on the GPU and you're going to drop closer to 30 FPS. But the GTX 1650, I have no explanation. And finally, the A380, but I didn't put in the i5 4460 or the Ryzen 3 1200. I've put it with the i3 10100F, the minimum recommended system to run the Intel GPU. And some modification to the settings, it's still 1080p, but the default, it put itself at medium and it use XeSS because it's available instead of FSR, and the XeSS instead of balance is at quality. And with all those settings we get an average of 58 FPS. My guess is the A310 should have been the minimum for Intel, not the A380. The A310 is closer to the RX 560 or GTX 1650 than the A380, but that's what the dev propose for the Intel GPU, so that's what I'm testing. So if you want to see the A310, watch the next video, that will be the Intel Arc GPU with Like a Dragon. But for the A380, the GPU is pegged in the mid 90s, so not even pegged at 100%, using 3.3 GB of VRAM out of 6, which the A310 have 4 GB of VRAM. Should have been perfect. CPU, for sure it's overkill, and for the RAM we're still using 7.2 out of 16. All those tests that was done on the demo. The demo is available right now. The game is coming out the 21st of February in 2 days, so you can actually test the game on your system if you're going to be able to play with your PC spec. I don't know if they're going to keep the demo after the release on Friday. We will see. Still have the game to test on Arc GPU and to find out the real minimum requirement for this game. So thanks for watching, see you on the next one, and subscribe.